The look on Officer Martinez's face when he realized what was happening was pure gold. He stood there in my garage, staring at Susan the Enforcer Blackwood as she pointed dramatically at my pickup truck, her voice reaching that special pitch that only comes from years of practice terrorizing minimum wage workers. This vehicle has been illegally parked in this community space for 3 days. She shrieked, her HOA badge glinting in the afternoon sun like a discount sheriff star. I demand you tow it immediately. Martinez slowly turned his head, taking in the oil stains on my concrete floor, the tool chest against the wall, and the private property sign that had been hanging there since I moved in 6 months ago. Ma'am, he said with the kind of patience usually reserved for dealing with drunk college students, this is his garage. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife and served it at a dinner party. But let me rewind and tell you how we got here, because this masterpiece of neighborhood insanity didn't happen overnight. It started 3 months ago when I made the terrible mistake of parking my truck in my own garage with the door open. Picture this. I just moved into Meadowbrook Commons, a cookie-cutter subdivision where every house looks like it was designed by someone who thinks personality is a 4-letter word. The garage door opener was broken, so I've been keeping it open during the day while I worked on my truck. Enter Susan Blackwood, HOA president and part-time destroyer of human happiness. Susan was the kind of woman who probably practiced her I need to speak to the manager voice in the mirror every morning. Mid-40s, with the kind of blonde highlights that screamed I peaked in high school, and the dead-eyed stare of someone who found her calling in making other people miserable. She appeared at my garage opening on a Tuesday morning like a polyester-clad harbinger of doom, clipboard in hand and wearing what I can only describe as a Karen uniform, khaki capri pants, a floral print blouse, and white sneakers that had never seen a speck of dirt. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that immediately puts you on guard. "I'm Susan Blackwood, HOA president. We need to discuss your parking situation." I looked up from under the hood of my truck, wrench in hand. "Parking situation. Your vehicle." She gestured at my pickup like it was leaking toxic waste. "It's been parked in this community area for 2 days. That's a violation of our residential codes." I blinked. Community area, this space. She waved her clipboard at my garage. "It's clearly designated for temporary community use, not permanent vehicle storage." That's when it hit me. Susan thought my garage was some kind of public parking area. The woman had been HOA president for God knows how long, and she didn't even know which spaces were private garages. "Susan," I said slowly, "this is my garage." Her smile faltered for exactly 1 second before snapping back into place. "I don't think you understand. I've been president of this HOA for 4 years. I know every inch of this community, including my garage. This is not a garage. This is a designated community overflow parking area. Check your homeowner's agreement." I set down my wrench and really looked at her. Susan wasn't just wrong, she was aggressively, confidently wrong. The kind of wrong that comes from never being challenged in your entire life. "Would you like to see the deed to my house?" I asked. "I don't need to see anything. I know the rules." And, with that, she turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing in my own garage wondering if I'd accidentally moved into an alternate reality where basic property laws didn't apply. The next morning, I found a bright orange violation sticker plastered across my windshield. "Unauthorized vehicle in community space, remove immediately or face towing." I laughed, actually laughed out loud. Susan had just cited me for parking in my own garage, but the laughter died when I realized she was serious. Over the next week, the violations escalated. First came the official HOA letters, complete with legal-sounding threats and references to community standards enforcement. Then came the phone calls. Susan would call at random hours to remind me that my illegal parking was creating a hostile environment for other residents. "I've had 3 complaints about your truck," she'd say, her voice taking on that particular smugness that comes from wielding imaginary power. It's creating an eyesore in our community space. It's in my garage. Susan, sir, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I won't be fooled. That space is clearly marked for community use. I started leaving my garage door open just to spite her. Every morning, I'd make a show of walking out to my truck, keys jingling, making eye contact with Susan as she did her morning patrol of the neighborhood. She'd stand across the street, arms crossed, watching me like I was some kind of criminal mastermind. The woman had apparently appointed herself the neighborhood's unofficial parking police, but Susan's real genius was in the escalation. She started documenting everything, taking photos of my truck from different angles, measuring the distance between my bumper and the garage door, even interviewing neighbors about the noise disruption caused by my illegal vehicle. Mrs. Peterson from next door told me Susan had knocked on her door at 7 a.m. to ask if she'd been disturbed by the unauthorized automotive activity in the community area. I told her it was your garage. Mrs. Peterson said, but she just wrote something down and walked away. The turning point came when Susan called an emergency HOA meeting. She sent out official notices to every house in the subdivision, complete with an agenda that listed unauthorized vehicle enforcement as the primary topic. I showed up, curious to see how deep this rabbit hole went. Susan stood at the front of the community center like she was addressing the United Nations, a PowerPoint presentation ready to go. The slides were titled Protecting Our Community, a Case Study in Enforcement. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, clicking to a photo of my truck. We have a situation. This vehicle has been illegally parked in our community overflow area for 3 weeks. The owner has been uncooperative and refuses to relocate. She clicked through more slides, photos of my truck from every conceivable angle, measurements, even a hand-drawn diagram of the community space with my truck marked in red. I've tried reasoning with the individual, Susan continued, but he claims the space is his garage. She made air quotes, her voice dripping with disdain. As if we wouldn't know the difference between a garage and a community area. That's when Mrs. Peterson raised her hand. Susan, that is his garage. The room went quiet. Susan's smile flickered like a dying fluorescent bulb. I'm sorry. What? It's his garage. I live next door. I see him park there every day. It's been a garage since the houses were built. Other neighbors started murmuring agreement. Susan's face went through several interesting color changes. You're all mistaken, she said, her voice rising. I've been president for 4 years. I know every inch of this community. Then why? Called out Mr. Johnson from the back row. Does his deed say including attached two-car garage? Susan's PowerPoint presentation suddenly seemed a lot less impressive, but Susan wasn't done. If anything, the public pushback only made her more determined. She started what she called enhanced enforcement, showing up at my garage multiple times a day, sometimes with a tape measure, sometimes with a camera, always with that clipboard. She'd stand at the edge of my driveway, furiously scribbling notes about ongoing violations and community disruption. The woman had apparently decided that if she couldn't prove I was wrong, she'd just overwhelm me with sheer persistence. The final straw came on a Saturday afternoon. I was working on my truck, radio playing, garage door wide open, when Susan marched up with her phone in hand. I'm calling the police, she announced. I looked up from my engine. About what? Illegal parking, disturbing the peace, and misuse of community property. This ends today, and she did it. Right there in my driveway. Susan called 911 and reported that someone was illegally occupying a community parking space and refusing to move. Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, probably expecting to deal with a standard parking dispute. Instead, he found Susan standing in my garage, pointing at my truck like she was presenting evidence at a murder trial. Officer, this vehicle has been illegally parked in this community space for weeks, she explained, her voice carrying that special authority that comes from years of terrorizing retail workers. I've documented everything: photos, measurements, witness statements. Martinez looked around my garage, taking in the oil stains, the tool chest, the private property sign, and the obvious residential nature of the space. Mum, whose garage is this? It's not a garage, Susan snapped. It's a community overflow parking area. I've been HOA president for 4 years. I know every inch of this development. That's when I played my ace. I walked over to my tool chest and pulled out a manila folder I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Officer, I said, I think you might want to see this. I handed him the original architectural plans for my house, complete with the garage clearly marked and labeled. Then came the deed, the homeowner's insurance policy, and the best part, the original HOA covenants, which specifically listed my address, including attached two-car garage. Martinez studied the documents, then looked at Susan, who was now the color of a ripe tomato. Ma'am, he said, this is definitely his garage. That's impossible, Susan sputtered. I've been president for 4 years. Yeah, you mentioned that. Martinez was clearly trying not to laugh, but you might want to brush up on your property boundaries. But here's the beautiful twist that made everything worth it. While Martinez was reviewing my documents, I mentioned that I'd been curious about Susan's constant references to community overflow parking areas. So I'd done some research. Turns out, there never were any community overflow parking areas in Meadowbrook Commons. The original developer had planned them, but they were removed from the final design due to drainage issues. The plans Susan had been referencing were from a preliminary proposal that was never implemented. She'd been enforcing rules for parking areas that didn't exist in a space that had always been my private garage. Martinez added this information to his report, along with a note about frivolous use of emergency services. As Susan stood there, sputtering about her authority and her 4 years of experience, Martinez delivered the final blow. Mum, filing false police reports, the misdemeanor. I'd suggest you familiarize yourself with actual property boundaries before making any more calls. The best part. The story spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church bake sale. By the next morning, everyone knew that Susan, the 4-year HOA president, had called the police on someone for parking in their own garage. Susan resigned from the HOA the following week, right after the local newspaper picked up the story. The headline read, HOA president calls police on homeowner's garage. They used a photo of her standing in my driveway, clipboard in hand, looking like she was about to demand to speak to the manager of reality itself. I still park my truck in my garage. Same spot, same open door, same complete lack of regard for Susan's non-existent community parking regulations. The only difference now is that I installed a security camera not for protection, but because I didn't want to miss any future entertainment. Sometimes I get joke violation stickers from neighbors. Last week, Tom from across the street cited me for excessive smugness while checking mail. I framed that one right next to my deed. The moral of the story: know your property lines before you try to enforce them. And if you're going to call the police on someone, maybe make sure they're actually breaking a law first. Susan learned that lesson the hard way. I just wish I could have been there when she tried to explain to her husband why she'd called 911 on a garage.